A woman walked up to me on the street, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "I believe you've been raising my son. My name is Lena Callahan." And I had never seen her before in my life. And the worst part? She wasn't wrong. Let me take you back to where this actually started. Not to that moment, but to a Thursday night in January, in Hyde Park, Chicago, when my entire life changed because I followed a sound. It was freezing. The kind of cold that settles into your bones and stays there. I had just finished grading student essays and was walking down the hallway of my apartment building, tired, half distracted, thinking about nothing more than getting into bed. The building was old. Brick walls, narrow hallways, the kind of place that always smelled faintly of someone else's cooking. But that night, something was off. Too quiet. Not peaceful quiet, wrong quiet. The kind where your body picks up on something before your brain does. I slowed down without even meaning to. And then I heard it. Faint. Almost nothing. A broken, muffled cry, the kind of sound that's more exhaustion than noise. Like someone had been crying so long they barely had anything left. I followed it without thinking. Down the hallway, around the corner, toward the emergency stairwell. And there, tucked into the shadows, was a wicker basket. Not a car seat. Not a baby bag. Just a worn, everyday basket wrapped in an old coat, its edges damp from the cold. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I crouched down slowly. And I saw him. Tiny. Barely a few days old. Wrapped in a hospital blanket, cheeks red and wet, lips moving but making almost no sound. He wasn't really crying anymore. He was just trying. Just barely holding on. Someone had left him there, in that dark hallway, in January, in the cold, and walked away. Next to him, folded awkwardly like it had been written in a hurry, was a small piece of paper. 5 words. Please take care of him. My hands went completely still. I pulled out my phone and called 911. But while I waited, while the cold pressed in and that tiny boy barely moved, I couldn't just stand there. I reached in, picked him up, and pulled him against my chest. Held him tight. Like the warmth of my body was the only thing I could offer him right then. And honestly, maybe it was. The ambulance came within minutes, though it felt like hours. I rode with them to the hospital and didn't let go of his tiny hand until they asked me to. I watched the city lights blur past the window, and something shifted in me. Something permanent. I didn't know his name. I didn't know anything about him. But I already knew I wasn't going to walk away. At the hospital, the hours blurred together. Doctors moving quickly. Nurses talking in low voices. Me sitting in the corner, watching a baby I had no legal connection to, completely unable to leave. By morning, the news was clear. No one had reported a missing newborn. No alerts. No calls. No one was coming for him. The nurses started calling him Baby John, a name for the records, nothing more. Cold and practical, like a file number. But even that felt too small for what I'd seen in his eyes. Inside my head, another name had already started forming. The next day, a social worker came to speak with me. Clipboard in hand, patient expression. "I'm Sandra Kowalski, Department of Children and Family Services." She extended her hand. "Lena," I said. "Lena Callahan. I live in the building. I'm the one who found him." She explained the process, temporary guardianship, state custody, the system that would take over from here. I listened to every word. And then I heard myself say, "I want to keep him. I want to adopt him." She paused, then sat down and started listing requirements. Financial stability, home ownership, marital status, psychological evaluations, background checks. I didn't meet most of it. I was single. I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment above an old bookstore called Blackwood Books. My savings were basically nothing. But I looked at her and said, "What I have is enough, and I want to give him my entire life." She sighed, the sigh of someone who has heard big promises before and watched most of them fall apart. But she handed me the paperwork. and I filled out every page with steady hands. That afternoon, sitting beside his hospital bassinet, I decided on his name. Jonah. Because he'd been swallowed up by the cold and the dark, and he'd made it through anyway. That's exactly what it felt like. The adoption process wasn't quick or easy. Weeks of home visits, interviews, background checks, more paperwork than I thought possible for one small human being. They asked me, in different ways, over and over again, whether I was truly ready to give up my life for a child. Every time, same answer. I'm ready. In March, they let me bring him home. That first night, he didn't cry. He just lay there in his crib, eyes open, staring at the ceiling like he was looking for something, or someone, that wasn't there. I sat beside him and rocked him until the sun came up, making up stories about stars and second chances and little boys who were found exactly when they were supposed to be. I was 31 years old. He was barely 3 weeks old. And somehow, in that small apartment above Blackwood Books in Hyde Park, we saved each other. The first few months were hard in every practical sense. Money was always tight. I was a teacher, picking up extra tutoring jobs, clipping coupons, stretching every dollar. I sold my father's old guitar to buy Jonah a decent crib. I'm not telling you that for sympathy. I'm telling you because there was never a moment where I thought it was too much. Not once. A lot of people in my life asked me why I would take on an abandoned child alone, without a partner, without a plan. I always wanted to say, you didn't hear that cry. You didn't feel what I felt when I picked him up. But I just smiled and kept going. Jonah became my reason. Simple as that. Our life was modest, but it had its own kind of magic. Because we didn't have a fireplace, Jonah, around age 4, drew one on cardboard and leaned it against the wall. He'd sit in front of it with his toys, completely serious, like the painted flames were actually warm. I watched him from the kitchen and thought, maybe real wealth isn't about what you have. It's about what you create where things are missing. When other kids talked about vacations, we went to the library. Jonah would pick out postcards of different cities, and at home we pinned them to an old map on the living room wall. Someday we'll go to all these places, I'd tell him. He didn't mind that someday was far away. Dreaming out loud was enough for him. Every January 12th, the night I found him, we had a tradition. Lights off, one candle, and I told him the story of a cold hallway in a basket and 5 words on a piece of paper. Every year, when I finished, I whispered the same thing. Today was the day I met you. He would listen without saying a word. Just watching the candle. There's one memory I go back to more than any other. Jonah had just learned to walk. We were on the living room rug playing with wooden blocks, his hands sticky with jelly from a rushed breakfast. I was building a tower and he was laughing every time it fell. Then he stopped. Looked up at me. Reached out and touched my face with those sticky little fingers. And said, Mama. Just like that. Like he'd always known it. I got up, walked to the bathroom, closed the door, and pressed a towel against my mouth so he wouldn't hear me cry. It wasn't sadness. It was the release of someone who, for the first time in her life, had been chosen without conditions. Without strings. Without any reason other than love. From that moment on, everything we built was built on that. Not blood. Not paperwork. Just the simple, daily choice to show up. When Jonah turned 8, I knew it was time to tell him the truth. Not because he'd asked. But because he deserved to know, and because I didn't want him to ever feel like his beginning was something to be ashamed of. We went to Nichols Park, 2 blocks from our apartment, his favorite spot where the ducks gathered under the bridge. We sat on an iron bench. I watched him for a moment before I started. He had this way of leaning forward when he was really listening, like he didn't want to miss a single word. I took a breath. Jonah, there's something I want you to know. You weren't born with me. You were left in a basket in my building's hallway. There was no one there to take care of you. And in that moment, you became my whole world. He didn't respond right away. He picked up a stone and threw it into the water, watching the ripples spread. My heart was hammering. Then he turned to me, reached out, and squeezed my hand. I still choose you, he said. 8 years old. And he said that. I pulled him into a hug and cried, not from sadness, but from the kind of relief and gratitude that has nowhere else to go. The truth was no longer sitting between us. There was just trust. And a boy who had already decided what mattered. As he got older, Jonah got quieter, but in a good way. He started spending more and more time in the building's attic, a cramped space with creaking floors and old boxes in every corner. He turned it into his studio. Crumpled paper, worn charcoal sticks, paint stains soaked into every surface. At first, he drew the way most kids do, dragons, castles, creatures from bedtime stories. But around 12 or 13, his work changed. The fantasy faded. He started drawing real people. Bus passengers. Neighbors. Strangers from the corner market. And there was something in those drawings that stopped me every time, a quiet sadness, a weight that felt much older than he was. One afternoon I slipped up to the attic without him noticing. He was focused hard, drawing the profile of an older woman. When he finished, he set it aside without looking at it, like something he needed to get out, not keep. I stared at that drawing for a long time. The expression on her face was so real, so worn. That's when I understood drawing wasn't a hobby for him. It was how he processed the world. That year, his school held an art competition. He didn't want to enter, he hated being judged. But he submitted one piece. A large dragon, not the playful kind from childhood, but an old tired one, sitting on the ground, reading a story to a small knight who looked terrified but was leaning in anyway. He won first place. I watched him walk onto that stage, shy and a little awkward, certificate in hand. I clapped until my hands hurt. I still have that drawing, taped to the inside of my closet door. Around this time, Jonah started pulling away, not in a bad way, just the natural way teenagers do. His silences were more internal now. He was building something in his own head, a life separate from mine. Then one night, over reheated leftover pasta, he put down his fork and looked at me with a mix of nerves and determination I recognized immediately. "Mama, I want to go to an art school. In Portland, Oregon. I think I could really grow there." I touched his cheek. I told him we'd find a way. And I meant it. But that night, after he went to bed, I sat in the kitchen alone and let myself feel the weight of it. The particular kind of love that comes with knowing you're raising someone to leave. That's the part they don't warn you about. Then one morning I came downstairs and found a note on the kitchen table. Jonah's handwriting. At the top, just my name. Not Mama. Lena. Like he needed me to know it was serious. The paper was crumpled at the corners, like he'd picked it up and set it back down a dozen times. "I love you. Please don't hate me for wanting to know where I come from." I read it twice, folded it, put it in my robe pocket, and spent the rest of the day with a hollow feeling I couldn't shake. A few days later, I came home with grocery bags in both arms. There was a black car parked out front, engine running, tinted windows. I figured it was someone for the landlord. Then the door opened. A woman stepped out. Tall. Perfectly put together. Reddish hair in a tight bun, red coat cinched at the waist, heels on pavement. She walked toward me like she already knew exactly who I was. She smiled. The smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Audrey Delaney," she said. "I believe you've been raising my son." The grocery bags almost hit the ground. She followed me inside and sat at my kitchen table like she owned the room. Black folder with gold lettering, Hargrove and Sloan LLP. Voice soft, every word measured. "First, I want to thank you for what you've done. But the time has come for Jonah to reconnect with what's his blood, his family, his history." "Where were you?" I said quietly, 17 years ago. She didn't flinch. "I was 18. An addict. Terrified. Leaving him was how I saved his life. But I'm well now. I want a second chance." "You didn't leave a name or a number," I said. "You left a note asking a stranger to clean up the mess. And you did. Beautifully. But he's still mine." "No. He's not. Not anymore." She slid a paper across the table. A DNA test. Positive match. At the door, she stopped. Jonah contacted me weeks ago. He was afraid of hurting you. But we've already spoken. It's only a matter of time. And then she was gone. I went to Jonah's room. He wasn't home. The space smelled like paint and damp wood and the shampoo he always left uncapped. I sat on the edge of his bed and picked up a sketchbook. Opened it to the last page. 2 women, drawn in mirror fragments. One sharp and clear. One blurred and unfinished. In the corner, one word, divide. I didn't cry that night. I just lay on my bed and stared at the ceiling. The weeks that followed had a strange, surface-level calm. Jonah was still home, still eating dinner with me, still leaving his shoes by the door. But his mind was somewhere else. We both knew it. He started spending time with Audrey. Weekend trips up to Lake Geneva. He'd come home with sun-reddened cheeks and a photograph in his hand. Once he held up a picture of her when she was young, sitting in the sand with a guitar. I have her nose, he said. More to himself than to me. I smiled. I didn't stop him from seeing her. Not once. He needed to follow that thread. I understood that. Even when it hurt. Audrey invited us both to dinner one evening downtown at the Meridian Room. White tablecloths, candlelight. Jonah asked me to come, and I said yes. I wore the blue dress he had given me for Christmas. We walked in together. She was already at the table, red coat over the back of her chair, glass raised. The conversation stayed on safe ground, scholarship applications, artwork, college plans. But underneath every sentence pulsed the question nobody was willing to say out loud. Who do you belong to? Jonah felt it. I could see him glancing between us, like he was trying to read 2 different books at once. Then he put down his fork and looked up. I don't want to lose either of you, he said, voice steady but quiet. But if I have to choose, I choose the one who stayed. The table went silent. I didn't say anything. I just reached under the table and held his hand. Audrey looked down at her glass. She didn't respond. The manila envelope arrived 3 weeks later. Legal notification. Audrey had filed a petition for custody review. Real lawyers. Real paperwork. Real threat. I sat at my kitchen table with that envelope for a long time. The real fight was just beginning. The morning of the hearing, the city was covered in thick fog. I put on a navy blouse and my mother's pearl earrings. I needed to feel like I came from somewhere solid. Audrey was already seated when I arrived. 2 lawyers beside her, expensive suits, practiced expressions. I sat on the other side with a folder. Photographs. Report cards. Receipts. Doctor's visit records. Drawings Jonah had made me over the years. No lawyer. Just everything I had. The judge opened the file and spoke in measured terms about the minor, the biological mother, the legal guardian. Not once did she use the word mother for me. Audrey's lawyers went first. They were good. A clean, compelling story, a young woman who had suffered, recovered, and deserved to know her son. Blood ties. Natural bonds. One even suggested, carefully, that staying with me might limit Jonah's opportunities. I sat there and let them finish. Then I stood up. I'm not here to argue with her biology. I'm not here to deny her recovery. I'm here because 17 years ago, I found a baby alone in a dark hallway with no name and no plan, just a note that said, please take care of him. And I did. I told them about his first steps on the worn living room rug. His fear of thunderstorms at 7, climbing into my bed while I made up ridiculous stories until he fell asleep. The broken arm at 10, the math test that made him cry at 13, the measles that kept us both awake for 4 days straight. I told them about the cardboard fireplace. The map with the postcards. The sketchbook with the word divide in the corner. I didn't give him life, I said. But I gave him his childhood. I was there for every fever, every nightmare, every first. I let him be angry at me. I forgave him before he knew how to ask. I taught him to fail with dignity and to say I'm scared without shame. Isn't that what being a mother is? The room was completely still. The judge had stopped writing. She was looking directly at me. She didn't rule that day. But something had shifted in that room. You could feel it. When we walked out of the courthouse, the fog was starting to break. The air smelled like rain. Jonah was waiting on the steps. He walked straight to me and said it again. If I have to choose, Mama, I choose the one who stayed. The fear I'd been carrying for months cracked. Just enough to let some light in. The ruling came a few weeks later. I would remain Jonah's primary legal guardian. Audrey would receive scheduled visits, supervised meetings, occasional calls. Not a clean victory. But the decision that truly mattered had already been made, not in a courtroom, but by a 17-year-old boy who knew his own heart. My life is here, Mama, he told me one evening. And if I ever leave, it'll be for my dreams. Not because someone took me. 2 months later, the letter arrived. Full scholarship. The Cascade Institute of Art and Design. Portland. He came through the door soaking wet from the rain, handed me the envelope without a word, and watched me read it. I got halfway through before my knees gave out. I sat down hard and cried in a way I hadn't cried in years. He sat down on the floor right next to me, the way he used to when he was small, and rested his head under my chin until I was done. The weeks before he left were a strange, tender kind of painful. Suitcases open on the bed. Lists everywhere. I folded his shirts and memorized the sound of his footsteps on the stairs. The smell of charcoal. The shampoo he always left uncapped. The morning he left, his room was almost empty. Pale outlines on the walls where his drawings used to hang. I stood in the doorway and looked at it for a while. Then I smiled. That emptiness wasn't loss. It was proof that something had grown big enough to need more space. I hugged him outside for a long time. He hugged me back hard. I love you, Mama. I love you, Jonah. And I watched him walk away with his backpack on and his eyes already somewhere ahead. A week after he arrived in Portland, his first letter came. A pencil sketch of the skyline from his dorm window. Simple. Clean. I framed it and put it on my bedside table. Letters came every week after that. Little moments from a life he was building. But one envelope stopped me completely. Inside was a watercolor. Under a tree, 2 women sitting together. One with reddish hair. One with a tired face and a warm smile. Underneath, in Jonah's handwriting, I belong to the one who stayed. I sat with that painting for a long time. I didn't cry right away. I smiled first. Because my son had found his own answer. And it was his. Not the court's. Not mine. Not Audrey's. His. A few years later, I got a call from a hospital. Audrey. Her liver had failed. The years of damage had finally caught up. Jonah was with her in those last days. He held her hand. Told her it was okay to rest. Told her he was at peace. When she passed, he called me. Come get me, Mama. I drove there and brought him home. We didn't say much on the ride back. Sometimes you don't need to. Weeks later, he arrived at the apartment with a cardboard box wrapped in brown paper. Set it on the kitchen table. This is from her. She wanted you to have it. Inside were photographs of Audrey when she was young, before everything fell apart. Hospital bracelets. Scraps and mementos. And at the very bottom, folded carefully, was the original note she had left in that basket 17 years earlier. Please take care of him. The same 5 words. The ones that had changed everything. Beneath it all was a worn hardcover notebook. Her journal. It took me weeks to read it. The handwriting was cramped, full of crossouts and ink smears. She wrote about addiction, fear, nights with nowhere to go. She wrote about a baby she couldn't keep. And in one passage, written larger than the rest, she wrote, "The woman who took him, Lena, I found out later, she was the miracle I didn't deserve to ask for. She knew my name. She had known it for years." I sat with that for a long time. I closed the notebook and sat quietly. She had wanted someone to love him the way I did. She just couldn't be that person herself. And in her own broken way, she had hoped. That was enough for me to forgive whatever still needed forgiving. Today, Jonah is a professional illustrator. His work appears in children's books, on community murals, and workshops he runs for kids in foster care and group homes. Every weekend, he gives hours to teaching art to children carrying the same uncertainty he once did, the weight of not knowing where they came from or where they belong. It feels like giving back what I was given, he told me once. I watched him work with those paint-stained hands and thought, he took his whole story, every hard part of it, and turned it into something that helps other people. That's not something I taught him. That's who he is. When someone asks me if I have children, I say yes. One son. He's an artist. He teaches. He loves deeply. Nobody asks for DNA evidence. Nobody asks about court dates or custody hearings. And even if they did, I wouldn't need to explain a thing. Because motherhood isn't a blood test. It's not a last name or a legal filing. It's the 3 a.m. fevers, the packed lunches made too fast, the advice given from the passenger seat of an old car that rattles when you hit 50 miles an hour. It's built in the invisible. In the things no one applauds. I didn't need biology to be his mother. I just needed to stay. And every single day, even now, I still choose him. That is my legacy. That is our home. Thanks for listening, and if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Drop a comment, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about the quiet, fierce love that holds families together long after the world says it shouldn't. Family is not always where you come from. Sometimes it's who refuses to let go of you in the dark.